the growth in single-use endoscopes may exceed 20% a year over year annual growth, which is quite significant opportunity. The primary concern is always about who's going to pay for this. There really is multiple stakeholders within the institutions that you have to satisfy the benefits of what this is doing. So I had a manager once tell me that when you have lots of capital available to you, you're just going to spend it. When you have limited resources, you're going to find a way to continue to move the needle forward. I think ultimately the best opportunity for the company is to
Welcome back to another episode of the GS MedTech Podcast, where I speak with industry leaders shaping the future of medtech. I'm Dame Medarski, and today I'm joined by Alan Lucas, CEO of EnlightenVue and CEO and co-founder of Navigation Sciences. Alan brings a unique perspective across investment roles, operating and advisory, and today we'll focus on EnlightenVue, but also on the broader model behind building multiple companies within a shared ecosystem. Alan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation to be able to come on to your program.
Nice. So we've known each other for about 4 years now, I believe. And I think earlier last month when we met, you've mentioned obviously that you have been a board member and now recently appointed a CEO of EnlightenVue. And maybe as a first question, I would like to know, what was your initial reaction when you first saw EnlightenVue's technology, and what made it worth your time as a board member initially?
Well, no, very, very good question. So let me tell you that I've been involved in minimally invasive surgical instrumentation pretty much my entire career. And when I saw the opportunity to actually create a micro-endoscope, one that it would be in the sub 7 French or close to 2 millimeters in outside diameter. And then once it reached its target location, allowed for instrumentation to be passed through the actual endoscope itself to the location by an expandable tip, a very unique patented approach to bringing instrumentation into very small lumens. I thought it was an incredibly novel idea and opportunity, and one that was actually presented to us at Alera Health while I was a senior consultant there. Both Giacomo Bassadona, who was the original inventor of the technology, who also had an involvement as chief medical officer at Alera Health, brought this potential. We all thought that it had significant opportunity to really change the standard of care for minimally invasive micro-endoscopic locations.
And how does particularly this single-use micro-endoscope change the current standard of care, if you don't mind elaborating a little bit more?
Yeah, so we looked at 3 potential market opportunities where we thought current endoscopes really couldn't easily pass through. In urological, between ureteroscopes between the bladder and the kidney for managing kidney stones. Also pulmonary to the far reaches in the lung where it's not always easy to get to biopsy locations, particularly with current standard endoscopes. The smallest size is roughly around 3.5 to 3.8 millimeters in diameter. If you look at the percentage difference, though just a millimeter and a half doesn't sound that much. But if you go back to your, grammar school geometry, it's really about a 45% difference in actual volume or size.
Yeah.
And so now you can reach these far peripheral locations more easily. And then the third area or an application that we thought, and actually really our first go-to target market, is in the biliary. Retain stones in the common bile duct, particularly for those individuals who are having cholecystectomies. There's a certain percentage, somewhere around 12 to 15%, that have a retained stone and require a secondary procedure, ERCP procedure, to actually remove those stones. So we looked at those 3 markets, and we really thought that the first go-to application was in the biliary.
Okay.
Hopefully that addressed your question.
Yeah, it definitely does. And maybe to further elaborate on this, obviously, why the shift to a single use rather than reusable endoscopy systems? Where do current reusable endoscopy systems fall short, both clinically, operationally, but also economically as well?
Yeah. So there's always been an issue about nosocomial infections or cross-patient contamination from an endoscope. Endoscopes are extremely difficult to clean, particularly the working channels. Clearly, the bigger the endoscopes are a little bit easier, but when you start getting into the very small endoscopes with very small working channels, it becomes extremely difficult to clean. The RCP scopes, in particular, with their elevator arms, the ability to be able to direct a catheter into the ducts, have proven to have a lot of potential issues about cross-patient contamination. So there's that aspect that is significant, but also there's been a long trend to moving to single-use instrumentation at hospitals, operating rooms, ambulatory surgery centers. The cost to re-clean and then sterilize or disinfect these products are extremely time-consuming and expensive. Now, not to say that a single-use product doesn't add some cost as well. There are, significant savings as it relates to personnel turnover, breakage that happens with the reusable endoscopes. So we think that there's a significant advantage, and that's been slowly changing the marketplace. And there are certainly other companies making single-use endoscopes in the market sector, but none of them with a 2 millimeter outside diameter.
And definitely, from my experience and conversations that I've had, it feels like disinfecting the endoscopes is using a lot of chemicals as well, which obviously from an environmental perspective, it's maybe more damaging than actually using a single-use device that then maybe it's recycled large proportions of it as well.
Very, very, very true. This is a significant, not only exposure to the environment, but also exposure to the technicians who are there, to clean and then recycle those instrumentation. So I think from our own analysis, we think that the growth in single-use endoscopes may exceed, a 20% a year over year annual growth, which is quite significant opportunity for a number of companies that may want to enter into this market sector.
Yeah. And you've mentioned the size, and is that your main differentiation in what is becoming, as you rightly pointed out, a little bit of a crowded single-use endoscopy space?
Absolutely. So, and I do believe that single-use instrumentation is extremely important for both patient safety as well as, ease of use and room turnover. But I want to stress that our real value add of this product is the small size with 2 working channels that allows us to get into locations that endoscopes previously haven't really had the opportunity to get to. So although I mentioned 3 particular markets, there are probably other markets in the market sectors, maybe in vitro fertilization or in vascular access, that our endoscope has an opportunity to, in market sectors that could be available to us, that others haven't really thought of simply because of the size.
And on the 3 markets that you've already mentioned, how far along are you in terms of the clinical studies and regulatory process?
Oh, well, currently right now, we're in a beta prototype of our biliary scope. And I anticipate that within 3 to 4 months, we'll freeze the design of the actual scope itself, then move into verification, validation with FDA 510(k) application sometime close to the end of 2026. Now, we do see that it's really a platform technology in the sense that the next scope that will follow will be a mother-daughter scope to be used in conjunction with a gastroscope for an ERCP application. So let me clarify that a little bit.
Please.
The first approach is for the surgical. So when the surgeon does a cholecystectomy, the removal of the gallbladder, they need to explore to make sure that there are no retained stones in the common bile duct. This gives that surgeon the opportunity to do that as a single procedure. And so that's why we chose to go to that marketplace first. So the patient pathway is often, for instance, if they come in an acute blockage, they're admitted into the hospital to the surgical ward. The surgeon then sends the patient to the gastroenterologist for an ERPC procedure to remove the stone, and then back to the surgeon for the removal of the gallbladder itself. In the past, when the surgeons did the procedure as an open procedure, they would at the same time explore the common bile duct to make sure that there were no retained stones, then remove them at the time of surgery as a single procedure. We think, and we've discussed this with a number of the general surgeons, that there's a significant opportunity to be able to do this as one procedure, thereby reducing the patient stay by 1 to 2 days, maybe 3 days in the hospital. This is a significant change from what current standard of care is. And we see this as a very, very good opportunity for us, which is why we chose that as the first go-to market entry.
Smart. And I'm assuming you're almost creating, rather than just a better tool, you're creating a story for a new category or new approach.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you pointed in that direction, because this is the way when gallbladders were done in an open procedure, this is how they were always managed. But as they moved to the laparoscopic procedure, they reduced the number of times that they would actually explore the ducts for retained stones, because they would send those patients to the gastroenterologist. And so the surgeons want to move this back, because it's an economic story as well. The surgeons can bill more for the duct exploration. They can reduce the hospital stay. So it's really win-win for the stakeholders. Patient only has one procedure. The surgeon makes more money. The hospital reduces the length of stay, so makes that patient stay, at least in the US, more profitable. And so we're quite excited about the potential opportunity. And if you compare this to existing scopes, the smallest available is 3.5 millimeters for this. A lot of the ducts are fairly small, and it's difficult to actually navigate to the location. We offer, benefits to all the key stakeholders and provide ease of use.
And I'm assuming offering those benefits, you're almost having multiple buyer opportunities as well, because it's not only hospital procurement, but also clinicians or administrators focused on cost and efficiency as well.
Exactly right. And as I think we all know, the committees that review bringing in new technology really need to understand the true economic benefits of what we're doing. There are clearly a number of stakeholders within the hospital. Your first champion needs to be the clinician, but the clinician doesn't always have control over the purchasing of new devices. Indeed. And so there really is a multiple stakeholders within the institutions that you have to satisfy the benefits of what this is doing. But there's a lot of cholecystectomies done in the US, probably about 700,000 that are done. So the market opportunity is really quite large. And so we think that, if 12 to 15% of those have retained stones, that's the addressable market for our product. But frankly, anybody who has had continued stones and has difficulty probably is an opportunity to just have the duct explored at the time.
It makes sense. And when you're approaching the commercial aspect, and I appreciate you're still further down the road, but I'm assuming being a strategic leader, you are already thinking about that as well. How do you frame the ROI, capex avoidance, reduced reprocessing costs, or just improved clinical outcomes? How do you paint that bigger picture?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. It's also a difficult one to answer. So I think there are a couple of approaches that we're looking at.
Mhm.
The healthcare economic study as it relates to the cost savings to the institution as it relates to the total number of days in the hospital. And in my presentation, my PowerPoint presentation, I try to lay out that patient pathway, particularly those patients that are admitted with an acute um, blockage, because there it becomes clear, reduce the number of days in the hospital and reduce the number of procedures that are done for that patient. As an admitted patient, the hospital gets paid a flat fee for the management of that patient. So if you can discharge them faster, reduce the number of clinicians that are interfacing, you reduce the gastroenterologist
Mhm.
from the actual patient care. Those are cost savings. And so I've started some discussions with a couple of different groups to help develop that economic study. We did do a while ago a look at what the costs are of reprocessing endoscopes. And those people who visit our website can see that study. That was done a couple of years ago when we first started thinking about this product and the opportunity that was there. I think we need to do another study as we get into early commercialization, our post-market study, to really look at where some of those benefits are. I'm sure that we'll have a good set of early adopters for the technology and add key advisors and clinicians to our advisory group, and then collect additional data as it relates to that.
Very interesting. And maybe if you can summarize the whole story from an investor standpoint, what makes EnlightenVue a scalable opportunity versus a niche product play? And I appreciate, obviously, you already mentioned the platform technology.
So, look, from an investor perspective, I always think that they're looking at the ROI and exit. They like to know that there's a strong management team with expertise in having brought products to market in exits of companies. They're looking at what's the length of time it's going to take from investment, how much capital is required through that continuum of effort to actually get to a sale. I think ultimately the best opportunity for the company is to be partnered or exit to someone who can already controls that channel. Ultimately what we want to do. And so it's really trying to define and work with your investors so that they understand what that timeline might be in their expectations. Because investors really think about what's the time as it relates to their use of capital and what are competing opportunities for that capital as well. So when I lay out what we're doing is that strategic partners in the endoscopy space, and that's actually quite a significant number of companies that potentially could be interested in this, have a strong, and these are from my direct discussions with them, have a strong interest in a sub-7 French endoscope for the marketplaces that I specifically discussed.
Yeah.
And it's my belief that if we prove our technology in one market sector, like the biliary, which is where we've decided to go first, that will spark a significant amount of interest around our intellectual property. So we spend a significant amount on patent and patent protection as it relates to the expandable tip concept and idea, and also really in 3 different families of intellectual property around the company. And so I make sure that our investors also understand that we're protected in that way, because as it relates to endoscopes, we all use very similar approach as it relates. We have a CMOS imager that become very inexpensive to purchase as it relates to the automobile marketplace where these cameras are used quite a bit.
Yeah.
We use now LED illumination, and that LED illumination is critical to our approach and also very inexpensive. And we all use extruded tubing and plastic handles. There's not a lot of differentiation there. But What is really unique to what we offer is the intellectual property around this expansion on the distal tip that allows the instruments to pass around the imager and the illumination. Very unique. So I've given you a very long reply to your question, but I think investors see market opportunities and they review and see a number of them. But what is important for me to express to our investors and future investors is that we have a clear pathway, we have intellectual property to that, and we understand when the best time is to run a process to bring strategics to the table. And so hopefully that addresses what you've asked.
And it definitely does. And if I may add to that, you're currently working on design freeze with an anticipation of a 510K towards the end of the year, which means that potentially some early commercial traction early next year, which from an investor's perspective, timeline-wise, especially when you consider their fund length, is actually very appealing because they can actually invest in you and potentially have an exit opportunities within 18 to 24 months, which is not always the case, especially in medtech.
Well, that's true. And I want to just point out quickly for you that in an earlier product that we developed, our very first alpha prototypes, we actually went to the FDA and we have a K on a product that we won't commercialize, but we'll use that product as our predicate.
Nice.
And so, and we got a very broad indication of use. So we chose to get a general use application for an endoscope. I haven't really decided fully on our strategy as it relates to, do we go for a specific indication of use on the biliary or we go for a general use? And as we go to other markets and change the length or change the how the scope is controlled, then we do a 510K special for different lengths and sizes of the actual scope itself. I don't want to get too deep into that strategy, but it's certainly a thought process. And I think that investors, always wonder about where is the FDA going to be. The primary concern is always about who's going to pay for this. Secondary concern is what about the FDA and your FDA pathway. I'd like to think from a design and engineering perspective, that's already clearly laid out based on the work that we've done to date.
Very intuitive, intelligent approach. And maybe to close this segment, since we're talking about investors and fundraising as well, you're in the middle of a round at the moment?
Yes, it's a $3 million round. So the amount of capital that's gone into this company has been very, very little. We've been very cost effective on how we've managed our monies to date. There's roughly been about $2.5 million invested to date in the company. We look now at a $3 million round that brings us roughly about $1 million devoted to engineering and $2 million to early commercialization. Then, if necessary to expand on commercialization, we'd probably do roughly around a $6 to $7 million round for once we've gotten initial traction into the marketplace. Our current investors are high net worth individuals and Alera Health. Alera Health is our largest investor. We have a company out of Europe that is our second largest shareholder. Most of we don't have a very large cap table in the sense that most of our investors are in the $500 to $1 million size check writers. So I guess I would best define it as Alera Health as well as family offices or individual company owners who have invested in what we're doing.
Incredible. Very nice story. And I've mentioned at the beginning that you're also CEO and co-founder of Navigation Sciences. And there is a bit of a, I would say, very intelligent play here that I'm hoping that I can get deeper into. How are Navigation Sciences and EnlightenVue investor sharing and potentially service providers applied to this? And is this an intentional strategy or did it just happen by occurrence?
No, it was. This was very well planned out from the
I
beginnings.
thought so.
Both Giacomo Bassadona, who sadly passed away last year, is the CEO of EnlightenVue and the co-founder of EnlightenVue. We both worked together at Alera Health. We both took and spun navigation sciences on technology that I had identified out of the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And Giacomo had this concept of a micro-endoscope for primarily biliary or applications that we discussed earlier. And so we spun both those companies out with initial seed investment from Alera Health. Then our cap table, although not exactly identical, we share a lot of the same investors that were friends of Alera Health, friends of Gabriele Brambilla, the CEO and founder of Alera Health, who is an active investor in both of those companies, both from a Alera Health investment as well as his own personal account. So in that way, we share investors, we share legal counsels. We do have separate intellectual property attorneys, and there's some specific reasons for that. But there's a lot of shared effort and shared management as well. So my head of engineering for Navigation Sciences is also head of engineering for EnlightenVue. And so in that way, I think we have a very cost-effective approach. Yeah. Neither company has any infrastructure in the standpoint we don't have offices, we all work remotely for the company. We use different contract engineering and manufacturing companies, but they're the those groups are managing the product development with our oversight and the quality systems that are required. So they're all 13485 manufacturers.
Very smart. And I'm assuming obviously having this shared ecosystem obviously reduces cost, and the reason why you've been so cost efficient is one of those reasons. But also, is it accelerating development timelines as well?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, and I'm not sure I can answer it the way you might think. The timelines are somewhat dictated by capital availability. And, I do think that it's incredibly important to show to investors or prospective investors that you're continuing to make clear progress in your product development cycle, no matter how much capital you have available. But, I think like anything, if we had a little bit more capital, we could accelerate in some ways product development. But we've made good progress, and I believe both companies, both in the advisors and directors and engineering forward. So I think that's been very good. I had a manager once tell me that when you have lots of capital available to you, you're just going to spend it. When you have limited resources, you're going to find a way to continue to move the needle forward. And I think we've done that very, very effectively.
And are you, by maybe not unplanned, but coincidence, effectively building a repeatable medtech venture platform rather than standalone companies?
I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, if that's what your question is. Really, look, I've got these two projects that I obviously want to see through fruition. So I'm really not sure what next is going to be there. I do have a very, very interesting project that I've been working on that's a little bit too early to announce, but it relates to some cell therapy and really very, very cool and very advanced. And I'm not sure where that's going to go, but the pipeline for me is get these two programs done and then spend some time in the sun.
Well, that's a very good plan as well. And maybe just looking forward and rather than looking forward, looking at a little bit different angle to this shared infrastructure model, because I'm assuming there are some risks as well. How do you think that this potential overlap actually impacts that? Do you see any distraction or governance complexity by having the two companies collaborating together? Are there any disadvantages over all of the advantages that you have already mentioned?
Yeah, I think at a certain stage, the companies, and it also relates to where my expertise is as well. At some point in time, one or both of the companies are going to require an expansion of the management team.
Yeah.
And it really becomes, I think, a discussion with the board. It becomes a discussion as to what the next stage of the company is going to be, commercialization. At what point is there a change in management for one or both? And so I think we have to be open to, what is the best management team depending upon where stage of the company is. And so I think that I addressed your question.
Yeah, definitely.
From that perspective.
I appreciate that very much. And Alan, you're carrying so much experience that I want to wrap this up maybe as an advice to some. Well, it's been challenging times recently, and it feels like obviously some are struggling while others are moving forward. How should first-time founders think about capital efficiency in this funding environment that we're at the moment?
Yeah. Look, it's always difficult to raise capital. And we've heard this for a long time. Technology, capital to various types of technologies goes in and out of favor. I do think that you need to get involved in an area that you have a high level of comfort with. To go and chase AI, for instance, when you don't have experience in that sector, I think is very, very difficult. So for me, I've always been involved in minimally invasive surgical instrumentation and implants, in surgeon preference like products. So if you know and understand your market and see opportunity, then I think you need to pursue that passion. That's really number one. And there may be times that you fail. You're going to learn from that failure. There are times that you're going to be very, very successful. And it's really just a matter of understanding what your capabilities are. Second, I get often a lot of calls like, gee, you've raised a lot of money from, single individuals and to fund these companies. How do you do that? Or can I get connections through you? These are relationships that you really need to nurture and foster directly by yourself. They don't necessarily really come from introductions. They come from close relationships that you have that then introduce you to secondary individuals that, have an interest and passion in with what you're doing. And it's not always that first tier of individuals that are going to be the investors. It's very often a second tier individual or a second level of introduction that you receive that you're going to develop a new relationship with that's going to invest capital in what you're doing. And it's really about developing that trust. It's just not saying, oh, this person has capacity, go talk to them. It doesn't work that way. It's not simple.
As you rightly pointed out, fundraising is never easy, but that's a very, very sound advice. I very much appreciate that. And thank you so much for this insightful conversation. It's been very, to me, enlightening to actually use the phrase from your company as well. And I wish you all the best with both Navigation Sciences and EnlightenVue as well.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about my passion, which is emerging technology companies and surgical applications.